So, for our conclusion of Unit 3, we are going to talk about the 5 ways to join independent clauses. And I've already previewed it several times because it just comes up so often on the SAT that it's impossible to teach one thing when without this coming up because it just shows up question after question. But now let's make sure that you have all 5 down. We did talk about it here on the last video. The first way to join two independent clauses is just putting a period in between them. The second is a semicolon, right? It looks like this, a dot with something that looks like a comma underneath. The third way is a colon, 2 dots, one on top of each other. That only works sometimes, so colon is sometimes. We'll talk about it more when we do our punctuation unit, but a colon introduces an example, an explanation, or a list. So if what comes after that colon happens to contrast the first sentence in any way, the colon is not going to be appropriate. So that's why it's only sometimes that second independent clause has to somehow be an explanation of the first, or else colon isn't the best choice. For a dash is a flexible punctuation point that can replace a semicolon, a colon, a strong comma, or a pair of commas. And in this case, we're using it to replace a semicolon. And so dash can always go in between independent clauses. The SAT only does that very rarely, but it is possible. So I want you to know it's on the list. And then the last one, comma conjunction, one of those fanboys conjunctions, and for is one of those. So not the comma by itself, not the conjunction by itself, right? But the two of them together can replace your period or your semicolon. All right, and if you don't like this circular, if you're a list person the way that I am, here is this same information in a list, your 5 ways, period, semicolon, colon, remember that's only sometimes, dash, and comma conjunction together as a pair. All right, so if you see, I'd like you to know that these 5 things all do exactly the same job. They live in that boundary between independent clauses. If you find two of these things are options, they're likely to both be wrong. Of course, you have to read the sentence to be sure because, like a colon and a dash and a comma conjunction have additional things that they might do. For instance, a comma and it might just be introducing the last item of a list. That might be an Oxford comma, right? So I wouldn't be 100% sure until I read the sentence. But if this is a situation, if your sentence is a situation where you have two independent clauses, only one of these 5 things can be an answer because all 5 of them could be correct. And the SAT can never give 2 correct answers to the same question, right? It's always 4 options, one of them is correct, and 3 of them is wrong. 3 of them are wrong, right? So if you see exactly one of these 5 things in your list, you should be like, oh, I think that's the right answer, right? There's how you predict. Now, when that's the right answer, the wrong answers are also quite predictable. So the next slide here, this is what the wrong answers will look like if the right answer is about joining two independent clauses. And we've seen this over and over again already in this class, but here I'm formally teaching it. I can't help it. I was born that way. Right there is the boundary between your two independent clauses. And look, you have nothing in that boundary. That would make it a run-on sentence. Here, you have a comma only. No, that comma has to be joined with a conjunction. It can't work by itself in this very specific boundary. In fact, the word for that is comma splice. And a comma splice means using a comma where a period could go or where a semicolon could go and is always wrong. Okay. The last one, here we have another one. In that boundary has the conjunction only, but is missing the comma. So and only. Here we have a semicolon, but this semicolon also has an and. Semicolons work by themselves. They don't like an and. The only time semicolon and can be correct is if you have a superlist situation. Superlists are quite rare. So whenever I see this, I cross it off right away. But then when I read the sentence, if I'm like, oh, no, I think it is a superlist, I might reconsider. But I always cross that off right away to remind myself, do not pick a semicolon and, right? Unless it's that very specific situation. And as I said, the word because, right? We don't put commas in front of becauses. We certainly don't put semicolons in front of becauses. So if you don't have, the last one is about we don't actually have two independent clauses. You change the second sentence or one of the sentences in some way that is no longer independent. You don't see that as often on the SAT, but that is a possible way to create a new incorrect answer. Right? It's when you see these first three in a combination. Nothing, comma, only, and only. And your third option is something from the first list. It's when you see that particular pattern, that's when you know when you're 95, 99% sure what the right answer is, even before reading the sentence. Do we still read the sentence? Yes, of course we do, but it's really nice to know what you're exactly what you're looking for when you read these complicated sentences. All right, speaking of which, let's try it out. So remember, read the options first. What am I looking at? Oh, I'm looking at a nothing. I'm looking at a comma conjunction. We have a semicolon, but hey, a semicolon can be in front of the and only for a superlist. But I don't think it's going to be in front of the word but for a superlist. I'm crossing that out. And a colon never has a conjunction afterwards. A colon introduces a list, right? An example or an explanation. None of those are going to start with a conjunction. C and D I can cross off right away. I'm going to read the sentence now to find out, do we have a compound predicate, in which case A would be the answer, or do we have two independent clauses, in which case B would be the answer? Let's take a look. A college degree is considered a prerequisite for many high-paying jobs. That is an independent clause. There are many successful entrepreneurs who have had a lucrative and fulfilling career without one. Yeah, that's an independent clause. We have two independent clauses, not a compound predicate, so we are going with B. All right, let's keep going. This one is a more difficult question, but you're going to approach it in the same way. I'm going to be quiet for just a minute so you can pause the video, try it on your own. All right, hopefully you paused. You have your answer. Let's take a look at this together. I know whenever I have a semicolon, I want to make sure that the semicolon is in between two independent clauses. I call this like the semicolon test, right? Do you have two independent clauses, one on each side? Well, let's start with A because that has a semicolon, and let's give it that test. Although ecosystems can be disrupted by human activity. That's not an independent clause. That's a sentence introduction. So A is not correct. And B, well, a colon works the same way. You need to have an independent clause, and you don't always have to have a second independent clause, but you definitely need that first before a colon. And if it didn't work for the semicolon test, it's not going to work for the colon test either. Let's get rid of B. Okay, I like C better because I like having a comma after that sentence introduction, right? Although ecosystems can be disrupted by human activity when managed properly. Oh, we have another semicolon. Can I put a period there after properly? No, I have not gotten to the main clause yet, right? I have not completed the thought. C is out. That means by process of elimination, D has to be correct. And that's true. We have a double introduction or an introduction with a uh, phrase inside of it, and the main sentence they can happens after that. D is going to be the correct answer here. All right, let's take a look at this other one. Again, it's a high difficulty. You have to really analyze it to get it right, but I will be quiet for a moment so you can pause the video and try it for yourself. All right, hopefully you had enough time. Let's look at this together. Um, I see an and a comma hug. That looks weird. I don't think it's that. Ooh, I see a comma after an and. No, when you have a comma conjunction, it's always in that order. Comma first, the and second. I like to remember that as if you think of one of the conjunctions as but, you should never put a tail on your but. And that is true for all of the conjunctions. The comma comes before it. That's why B has to be wrong. Okay, D and C, I think I'm going to have to read the sentence to see what I think about that. Material scientists can alter the properties of metals by adding impurities through a process called doping. All right, it looks like we have an independent clause there. Um, When done in a controlled manner, doping can result in materials with novel electronic and optical properties. Oh, if I start with when here, we have an intro and another main sentence. So together is like a dependent, comma, independent altogether there. You know what I need is one of those things from the list of five. And unfortunately, C and D, neither one of them are on my list. This is and only. This is comma only. So they're both wrong. And now I have a problem because I crossed out all four options, right? Well, let me go back and think. I know B is wrong because of that rule. Never put a tail on your butt or your and or your or, right? So B is wrong for that reason. A is possible because right here is my comma conjunction, right? And then but what about that other comma that comes afterwards? Well, this comma and this comma can be working together as a comma hug, right? They're around a removable phrase. And so look, this can be the start and this can be the end. So A is going to work out to be the correct answer. It does look weird. It looks like the word and might be in a comma hug, which is why I kind of exited the beginning. I don't usually see that. That is what makes this question high difficulty. But the fact is, the comma and together, that's doing one job. And the comma after the and, that is pairing up with the one later. And it doesn't really have anything to do with the and itself. And the and is not in a comma hug, right? Because the comma I have in green is not pairing up with the one after the and. So and is not being considered removable here. Even though there's a comma on both sides. It was very tricky, high difficulty, and I'll tell you what makes the high difficulty questions hard. Your intuition says that they look off, but then when you really analyze them, they end up being the only possible correct answer, and that's the situation here. So it looks weird, but it is technically the correct answer. A is it. If you got this one right, excellent job. That was a hard question. All right, here's another hard question. The SAT loves to ask this one. I would prefer not to talk about it because I think it's a terrible question. I think it's terrible writing because it's confusing. So please, as a writer, do not write this way. But the SAT made it confusing on purpose. So only one answer is correct. It's not good, but at least it's better than all the others, which are technically incorrect. So having said that, I'll be quiet for a moment. I want you to try and figure out which one it is, and then we'll go over it together. Okay, hopefully you pause the video. You've got your answer. Now let's look at it together. I'm going to scan the answers. One thing I'm noticing right away is that B and D are exactly the same, except we have a semicolon versus a period. And how could I decide which one is correct, right? If semicolons and periods do exactly the same job, it must be the case that they are both incorrect. So I'm going to cross those both off. However, sometimes it's the last word of a clause. Sometimes it's in the middle of a clause and removable. So now I'm going to have to read this sentence and find out if it's at the end of the clause or in the middle of a clause. The modern sport of rugby is said to have originated from a version of football that was wildly popular in the 1800s. Wildly popular. Now that is positive, right? Sports they like being popular, and that's important here. The game is often violent and unruly. Oh, violent is not so good. Like popular is good, but violent is bad, especially injuries. Injuries are bad too. I can see why there could be a contrast between the first sentence and the first part of the next sentence here, and I can justify having however between those two clauses, all right? And then if I look afterwards, rugby emerged as a modern variation of the game, still resulting in hundreds of injuries. Yeah, that's not so good. I am not going to put a however between like let's say this is clause 1, this is clause 2, and this is clause 3. Yeah, there's a contrast between 1 and 2, but there is not a contrast between 2 and 3. I can put the word however in sentence 1 or 2, but I can't put it in 3. That gives you the reason. Although I cross off B and D because of a test taking skill, that tells you why they're wrong. However, is the wrong transition word because there is no contrast between 2 and 3. What I have to do is make it the last word in clause 2 rather than the first word in clause 3. That makes A the correct answer. And by the way, C is incorrect because right here, that would be a comma splice. We do have separate independent clauses, so a comma by itself is not enough. So C is definitely incorrect as well. If you got this one right as A, fantastic job. Again, I'd love to skip it, but in the first 4 practice tests that the College Board published, 3 out of 4 of them had a question very similar to this. And I cannot tell you to always pick the one where the word however is before the semicolon, because in one of the 3 it came after the semicolon. So you've got to look for that contrast and figure out, use logic and look at the relationships between the concepts to find out where your contrast is. All right, so having said that, I got you ready for that question. One more to go. This is the last one of our unit 3. All right, please get your own answer. Hopefully you pause the video and you're ready to see the answer here. What I'm looking at is a and only, a comma and. When I see a semicolon and, I cross it off right away. I might reconsider if it's a super list. A colon and, always wrong. C and D, I'm going to cross off right away. So what I'm looking for, is this a compound predicate or is it 2 independent clauses? Calligraphy is characterized by its use of brush and ink and is often calligraphy is, and we have another is, but we do not have a new subject, right? So because there's not a new subject, this is a compound predicate. A is going to be the correct answer. And I know it's a little weird because we have that word and twice, but brush and ink, that's one pair that get connected by an and. Is and the other verb of is, that's another pair that get connected by the and neither one of those pairs wants a comma. So the answer here is definitely A. All right, thank you for staying with me through unit 3. I hope you learned a ton. I have a lot of practice problems for you to do, so please take the time to do that. Watching me do questions is great, but you doing them yourself is even more important. So do not skip the homework, and I'll see you in unit 4.